My name is Peter Kupisz. I'm a Canadian citizen, born and raised of dual Czech and Canadian citizenship. As I was growing up in Canada as a teenager, I became convinced that Christianity was really true. It was especially because I heard a lot of supernatural accounts of God working in people's lives. And I thought these can't be all made up. They can't be all people who are deceived. So I really became convinced it was objectively true. And so I thought, if it's really true, then the world needs to hear this. It really matters. It's not a private, subjective belief that's just for some people who want to believe it. No, it's an objective truth for everybody. I said, if that's the case, it matters that we share the Christian message because God deserves to be worshiped, not just for some people who feel like it, but all people should be worshiping God because that's what He's worthy of. So as I would talk with people, they would have objections, and I even had questions and such. So I started to discover good answers to these questions. I discovered this whole area called Christian apologetics. I was a bit skeptical of it at first because I didn't know whether they really had quality answers that would stand up to the toughest criticisms and skepticisms. But over the past maybe 10, 20 years or so, about 20 years, I've been very pleasantly surprised at what I found. There's some very good reasons to believe Christianity is true. I've wanted to share them with anybody who wanted to listen. And so I've basically come to be a Christian apologist through studying apologetics and deciding that other people need to hear about this. I'm here because today I was preaching at Seoul Union Church here at the campus of Yonsei University in downtown Seoul. But I'm in Seoul in Korea as part of a larger, I guess you could say, kind of a speaking tour. There's a number of different things that I'm doing. I was in Indonesia first for 2 weeks, about 2 weeks, and then in Cambodia for about a week, and then I'm here in Korea for about 2.5 weeks. And while I'm here, I'm meeting different people who partner with my ministry and support me, meeting some friends, but also in the other countries, I was speaking at Christian schools. A lot of times they have chapels and classrooms where they invite speakers to come in, and so I was invited. In Korea, though, mainly I'm preaching in churches. There's 3 Sundays I'm preaching. I'm here and then I'm preaching. Yeah, I first came to Asia it was 2007, I think, or 2008. And I came here because I had met Koreans before, and I was interested in this part of the world. I was also interested in teaching English overseas. I had met people who did that, and I wanted to have that experience. It sounded exciting to me to be part of a whole community of foreigners and to be teaching here and just experiencing the country. So I came because I was actually waiting to get a visa to go back to California. Well, here someone I knew from Australia said they needed help with an English camp at a church in Busan, South Korea. So I went to help with that church for just maybe 2 weeks. But when I was there, I got offered a job and decided God was opening that door. So I signed a contract for a year. After that, I went home for a year, and then I came back for 6 more years. So the 2 weeks that I originally came for turned into 7 years. So at the end of my time in South Korea, an opportunity came about for me to work for a Christian organization called Power to Change. Power to Change is essentially the same thing as Campus Crusade for Christ. So I got accepted by Power to Change to be a Christian apologist for them. And then that's why I moved back to Canada. And now I help lead essentially an apologetics team called Ultimate Questions. So Ultimate Questions right now consists of about 5, maybe 6. We have a 6th guy who's almost ready to start working with us. And we are a group of people who are convinced that Christianity is really true. and that it's important for people to know about it. So we are either all have graduate degrees or are pursuing them. And our passion is to tell universities, primarily university students and college students in Canada, but also to some degree high school students and people in other countries too as well, why it makes sense to believe in Jesus. If he is who he claimed to be, the way, the truth, and the life, then it really matters that people know that. So we want to present the best reasons that Christian scholars have as to why Christianity is true. And we're not interested in forcing this on anybody or trying to make anyone believe. But there's a lot of people who are interested in learning about that evidence, whether they're non-Christians and they're just open-minded, or whether they're Christians who have questions, maybe sometimes doubts. And we've discovered some great reasons to believe. So we've got Kirk Durston, who has his PhD now in biophysics. A number of other people have master's degrees. I have a master's degree in philosophy of religion and ethics from Talbot Seminary, and also a master's degree in the history and philosophy of science from the University of Toronto. And there are a number of other people on our team who have other graduate degrees. We've spent time studying the best answers that Christians have, and we just want to share it with people. So sometimes people on our team will do a debate. Sometimes they'll do a talk that's like an outreach type talk. I'm doing something like that this evening here at Yonsei University with Seoul Union Church. And then there's other things. Maybe we'll speak at weekly meetings, just talk to people one-on-one, whoever is interested in dialoguing. I don't find that much difference doing ministry in Asia versus Canada, because I usually speak with people who are proficient and fluent in English. My foreign language skills aren't that great. The second best language I speak is Czech, and even then, I mean, ministry-wise, I don't talk with a lot of people who speak Czech. It's just, that's the way it's worked out. So when I'm in other parts of the world, I'm usually speaking in English, and if someone knows English well, they're often watching Western media, and they tend to think the way that Canadians or Westerners do. Even when I lived here in Korea, I was mainly talking with expats. So, and when I speak at Christian schools in Indonesia or Cambodia, because they are English immersion schools, the students know English well, and they're getting exposed to Western media. So the questions that they have, the issues that they have, are not that much different from where Canadians are. And Canada is increasingly a multicultural, multi-religious society. On university campuses, they have Muslim groups and Hindu groups and Sikh groups. And so the religious diversity of Asia is now in Canada. And so it's not that much different. Maybe some issues of sexuality are hotter or bigger or more emotional in Canada. But I found, say, when I was in Indonesia, somebody was telling me that even in Indonesian media, they're talking about things like gay marriage and such. So it's not too different. For me, other than the experiences I've had of ministering in Southeast Asia and Korea, apart from my own ministry, I think of the growth of the church in South Korea. It's been amazing how in the last 100 years, economically, the country has developed so much, and in terms of the number of Christians here, it's grown a lot. South Korea is one of the countries of the world that sends the most missionaries out to other countries. And so I think that's fantastic, because I think Christianity is true. I also think, though, of the contrast between South Korea and North Korea and the incredible persecution of Christians in the North. I read a book by a lady called Lee Soon-ok, and she talked about how she was in prison in North Korea and that there were Christians there who were treated worse than anybody else. And it's hard to hear, but it also reminds me of what Jesus said, that following him will involve suffering and persecution. She talks about just some tremendous suffering. One time, a woman climbed up on a tank of human excrement, and there were other women that were with her. She fell in, And the guard that was with them said to just leave her in there. But the other Christian women wouldn't do that. They climbed in. They couldn't get her out because they didn't have a rope. So they ended up jumping inside this tank to help her get out. But then the guard ordered the last prisoners just to close the top and leave them in there. Leave them in there to die. Or another story she tells about, there was a group of about 8 Christian men who were carrying molten iron. And one of the guards said that tomorrow they were going to have a re-education day, and all those 8 men were going to renounce their belief in heaven and their belief in God. The men just stood there. They wouldn't say anything. So the guard became enraged, and he ordered other prisoners to get molten iron and pour it all over these men. And Lee Soon-ok says that when she saw it happen, the stench of burning flesh hit her. She says she fell to the ground as if she was screaming. And this is the way that Christians are suffering in North Korea. Of course, it's not just in North Korea, it's other parts of the world too, but the contrast between the South and the North is something that impacts me quite a bit. When I lived in South Korea, I did spend some time teaching English to a church that consisted of North Korean refugees. So I have done some stuff in the past to help North Koreans. But my passion in life is more just to tell people that the gospel is true and why it's true. I feel that a lot of people don't care whether it's true, though, because they don't think it really matters very much in life. And sharing the way that other Christians have suffered and the fact that Christ calls us to be willing to suffer and die for him, I think that helps people to suddenly care about whether it's true or not. One of the big problems, in my opinion, in the Western world, but other places, even Korea too, is people see religion as a private, subjective truth. It's something that's true for you if you want it to be true. It's like your favorite flavor of ice cream or your favorite restaurant. And people think of following Jesus in the same way. But when you explain that Jesus calls people to suffer and die for him, the way those North Korean Christians have suffered and died and are suffering even right now, it helps people understand that this is not about your favorite flavor of ice cream. This is not about your favorite restaurant. This is about following Jesus, even if it means that we die for him. And once people understand that, then it helps them to care about whether it's really true or not. And that's the whole realm of Christian apologetics. So I think apologetics has value and worth on its own, and following Christ and suffering for him has value and worth is an important point in and of itself, but the two can go together well too. People's response varies on where they are. Some people are very distant, very hostile to Christ. So if their parents sent them to a Christian school and told them, hey, you can go to the Christian school, but don't believe anything of what they say, then say if I'm doing a chapel talk, they will just sit there quietly or try to sleep or maybe try not to listen. But I seem to get a lot of students interested. I've told by the teachers that they're paying attention a lot more than normal. I was speaking, maybe it's a funny story. I was speaking at a school in Jakarta. This was the first time I had spoken there. They were actually on a retreat. And I was doing a brand new talk for them about how if God doesn't exist, there's no meaning or purpose to life. But because God does exist, there is meaning and purpose. And I didn't feel like, they weren't all looking at me in the eye, right? And nobody seemed to be talking or fooling around, but some of them were looking to the side or different places. And I kind of thought, oh, this doesn't seem to be going over that well, because I'm used to everybody looking at me. So I thought, okay, well, do the best I can. Afterwards, one of the teachers looked at me, she said, I've never seen them paying so close attention. So I guess they liked it more than I thought. They just, weren't looking me in the eye. And I think some of those might have been kids who were trying not to pay attention because they maybe don't want to be persuaded. They don't want to believe. But other students too as well. I don't know if they're Christians or not, but they come up to me afterwards and they're very appreciative. I remember speaking at a Espeja Lipo just a few weeks ago, and I was in like a cafeteria area just looking around, and one of the students came up and she's like, wow, it was so interesting. I really loved it. She said her friend was sleeping next to her or trying to sleep, and she was like, how can you sleep when he's saying this stuff? So you know, maybe if one person was sleeping, it wasn't as good as I'd like to think, but she was certainly very encouraging and had a lot of good things to say. And what I really love is when I get into good conversations with people afterwards, when they come up and they want to talk more, whether they're Christians who have questions and have issues and want to discuss things, or whether they're non-Christians. I don't want to have emotional arguments with people, because when people get angry, they're not concerned about truth. They just want to win an argument, right? But if I can have a good dialogue where people care about truth and they want to pursue that, and I'm fine if they want to disagree with me. I relish that. I'd actually rather have a good disagreement with a non-Christian rather than just spending 2 hours talking about the weather with Christians or something frivolous, right? I love people who care about truth and who want to think intelligently about these things. And sometimes I can even respect a non-Christian more who has all these arguments against Christianity because they care about truth. And I can respect that more than somebody who's a Christian but just is very passive about their faith and doesn't even really care about God. It's very superficial to them because they just don't care about the most important things in life. So when I have those kinds of conversations with people, either after I speak or in any context really, that's great. When I lived here in Korea, I remember some of my non-Christian friends, some of them were atheists, skeptics, Muslims. We would have conversations that would last 4 hours, 6 hours, even 8 hours. I remember sitting in, I think it was KFC one time, and literally we had sat there for 8 hours. I don't even think we took a washroom break or anything. And it was amazing. I really loved it because we were talking about the most important things in life. Yeah, I do think Christianity seems to be shifting. I mean, Europe historically was Christian, but the churches in Europe are empty by and large. That's not to say every church. And even in North America, you have people in the past who would identify as Christian, who didn't care about their faith, but now the next generation doesn't even bother to identify as Christian. So there's still lots of great solid believers in North America and other places like Australia and such, but sadly, the worldview of Western civilization is shifting more and more from a Christian worldview. And that's getting reflected in the lives of people and what they're even willing to call themselves. But you do see churches growing in places like Korea and Asia and Africa, South America, places like that. So that's great to see. God is the God of all peoples. And it's good to see churches flourishing and growing in all different parts of the world. It would be wonderful, though, to see Christians in the West, North America, Europe, and other places identified as the West, to care enough about the gospel that they realize that they present the full gospel, they present the fact that Jesus calls us to suffer and die for him, and to see it as important enough that they want to present a robust Christian worldview, including Christian apologetics. Many times Christians aren't even interested in that or even see it as wrong. And I think because Christians are not willing to present Christianity as an objective truth with good reasons for it, a lot of people don't take it seriously. When you present Christianity as just a private subjective truth, and you're indirectly doing that when you're not trying to relate Christianity to history, philosophy, science, and show how it makes sense and is objectively true. When you're not doing that, you're indirectly saying it's simply a private subjective truth. So when people hear, oh, it's just a private subjective truth, they hear it doesn't really matter. And if it doesn't really matter, well, eventually people stop caring. People who would go to church out of a habit eventually nice person. Well, since I lived in Korea for 7 years, every part of the world and every church has good things and bad things, right? Some of the good things I see, say, in Korean Christians is they have respect for authority, respect for the pastor. They care a lot about praying. They're willing to get up early to spend time praying. They care about doing evangelism. But of course, there's some negative sides too, as well as you know, every church does. And sometimes you see church factions and church splits. Sometimes the respect for the pastor goes too far, and the pastor's word is taken as infallible or something like that. Sometimes I've heard I've heard from a number of people that Korean missionaries who go out to other countries end up making the same mistakes that I think Western missionaries made, in that they not only want to bring the gospel there, but they want to bring their culture too as well. And it's very important to separate the gospel from the culture. We want to make disciples of Jesus, not disciples of our nation, whether it's Canada or Korea. I guess I just want to add that I invite anybody who has not taken the time to investigate the evidence for Christianity to do it. A lot of people just assume it's a matter of blind faith. But there are some very good scholars out there who have some very good arguments, I think, for Christianity. And most people just assume there is no good argument or no good reason. I think of William Lane Craig, who is one of my heroes, has 2 PhDs and has spent the past few decades arguing for Christianity in public debates with the top scholars in the world. And he usually either wins the debates or ties the debates, because the case for Christianity is really good. I also think of Alvin Plantinga, who, according to the atheist philosopher Quinton Smith, was almost single-handedly responsible for a dramatic transformation in Anglo-American analytic philosophy, where there were very few Christian theists in the philosophical world, and those that were there compartmentalized their faith. But over the past half century or more, the work of Alvin Plantinga has been of such high quality that it transformed the whole field of analytic philosophy. And now, in philosophy of religion departments at secular universities, statistics show about 70 to 80% of them take God seriously, believe God is real. And you know, this transformation is not just what Christians are saying. So the statistics show, and people like atheists like Quinton Smith are talking about it. So I hope that's just a little bit there that will catch people's attention and help them realize this is worth looking into. If Christianity is true, if Jesus really did die and rise again, then it changes everything. It means heaven is real, it means hell is real, and it means that when Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," no one comes to the Father but through me. That's not something that we can afford to ignore. Thanks.
What did you eat for breakfast this morning?
Cereal. Oh, well, you know, I have milk and cereal. It was almond milk, which I'm very suspicious of, because almonds don't have nipples. So how the heck do they get the milk from it? Yeah. So obviously there's some kind of a conspiracy going on.